So I thought I would take some time. Can you move a little closer to me? Fine. What's your favorite song? Here's our coffees. We get the same iced coffee every Wednesday.
I happen to like the Carpenters.
Oh, I know. Long ago and oh so far away. That one I know. But what's rainy days and then there's always.
I want to be close to you as everybody
Just
else.
like me.
They want to be close to you.
You want to take a drink because your voice is clear the palate.
Bobby Darin.
Somewhere waiting for. Go ahead.
You know this song. Somewhere beyond the sea.
What is the biggest piece of advice you have for fathers since Father's Day is coming up?
Appreciate the development and the child reaching out to you. So you know them, whether they're 5 years old or 20 years old. There's still that child inside. And you learn an awful lot from how they present themselves in the dilemma that they may.
I was going to translate that into non-psychology terms. If a child runs away from you for a while, like I did, and then they come back, you should allow them in and appreciate that.
Absolutely. And I've seen that in my own office. And I've seen that in the passage that we studied.
The parshas, meaning the Torah.
The best one for this
is what?
Hashem, God, sees every creature as his own. And he's very strong on that.
Right.
And now he's talking about if you're going to teach them with love. Instead of, it has to be this way, and this is the way it's going to be. And if you don't do it, you're not going to have supper tomorrow.
Oof, yeah.
And that goes on, and they think that that's the way discipline children. They don't. Better do this work or you're not going to eat tomorrow. That's kind of
harsh. You were in your past, your childhood was like black and white. Like if you don't go to synagogue on time, I'm taking away your prizes.
That's right. And that's what, this is totally different than the way I was taught, be it in Hebrew or English.
Right. You're saying the way we learn together.
No.
That's because I learned from Rabbi Aaron, and he's so loving. He was my first rabbi. You met him, and Rabbi Seidenfeld, and Rav Shuren, and Lynn Finson, and all these. I have so many, thank God, Rabbi Zeff, so many teachers that I've learned with over the years in Israel and in LA.
That's right.
And in Boca, or New York, who they're just shining examples of God's love. And I think what's interesting about what you said before is that everything is God's creation in a way, because we're all an extension of God, and we all are one. And we have to treat each other that way. That, Grandma Betty, who you love so much, even though she passed away, her Neshama Shev and Aliyah, she used to say that her mother, when she would ask her mother, like every kid asks, when you have multiple kids in the house, which kid do you love the most? Grandma Betty's mother, Grandma Sarah, she would say, if you cut I have 4 kids, and if you cut one of my fingers, it's going to bleed and hurt just as much as the other ones. And so if we all see each other that way, no matter what background we come from, ethnicity, race, whatever origin, we all have to treat each other like we're part of the same big family. Right. But it's today, and the reason why I started my podcast, it's very easy to just cut people off and say, you are bad.
That's it.
You didn't vote like me. I'm no longer speaking to you. There are families that have been separated from the elections that just took place, the last 2 elections.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
That's not democracy.
Right. That's definitely not democracy. But that's also not what the Torah teaches. You don't, just because, someone takes a step or votes a certain way or talks about a presidential candidate in a certain way, doesn't mean that you cut them off forever. Where's the learning in that?
Democracy requires a certain understanding, not only of yourself, but of other people that you're relating to.
Right.
And what happens is, in democracy, there are people that may want this, but they don't want that. It is up to you to give to one another, to be able to see that's a good idea. Why don't we try that? Because if we do this, then we do that, things may work out. as opposed to things must be this way.
Right. I understand. Okay. But that's also approaching everyone with a beginner's mind again. Like, let's be open, let's listen, let's talk about things.
Right?
What's one thing you learned from marriage? What's one piece of advice you have for having a successful marriage?
Understand the other person and give them a chance to air their full feelings about an issue, whether it's child raising or housekeeping or having a job. Be respectful.
Don't try to control the other person.
No. And some people get married because they can control that other person, and then they get frustrated.
Because you've been married a couple of times. So what advice do you have for me in terms of marriage? Because I haven't been married yet.
Yeah. Open your mind to what the person has to say.
Okay.
And give them an out in terms of why they are saying what they are. May have come from, most likely they've come from a different developmental background. They have a history when they started in school and all the way up to being 25 when they're getting married. There's a difference. And it's hard to hold back the horses and agree with the other person because you don't, he says, I wouldn't think like that, but why don't you give the other person a chance?
Ego is our enemy.
That's right.
What do you like about learning Torah?
It's a reading that's been around for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And it continues to go. Not only do we have one statement, but we have interpretations of those statements, understand where they're coming from. And it's not simply cut off like, well, these are fairy tales.
Right. Or it's archaic, so there's nothing to get here.
Right.
Well, what did you learn about the practice of it?
What does that mean?
Like when I told you, you have 2 diagnoses, Parkinson's and early AML leukemia. Yeah. We're going to nip this in the bud. Everything is energy. And if we have a set time once a week and we learn Torah together, you're going to improve.
Right.
So do you know that to be true? The practice of studying once a week with me at a fixed time, what are your feelings about it?
I love doing it with you because you're my daughter. May he be gracious to you. That's the prayer for the children.
Yeah.
May Hashem bless you and safeguard you. May illuminate his countenance for you and be gracious to you. May
God bless you.
I'm proud of you.
Thank you. Okay.
But, you're not coming across to me and saying, look, I've been in Brooklyn for 15 years and I know all the Bible. Mm-hmm. No, you teach it from your heart. And I think that's where Hashem wants it, because we're all his children.
You also teach me. That's why we call it learning, not teaching, because when you sit down and learn Torah, even if it's the biggest rabbi in the world, they always say, I'm going to learn Torah with my students because you ask questions I would never come up with. And, just because
I like when you say, that's a good question. Let's look at that.
It's funny because I grew up in your house.
Yeah,
and we never sat down and opened up this thing called the Chumash. We never did that, right?
No.
But it took me 30, 40 years later to say, let's sit down. It's time now. And I think that people in my generation, a lot of us went on birthright and went to Israel and went, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Let's bring this back home. And a lot of our secular families from the 70s and the 80s, we brought Torah into the house again. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that?
It was meant to be. So you brought the Torah back in a way that it could be understood and not be provoking.
Yeah, you often will say, God, this is so different than how I was raised. Because when you were in yeshiva, what was that like?
It was like you were always doing wrong, as opposed to, let's take a look at what you're doing. It's not truly getting the essence of what you want to know. Like the essence of crossing the Red Sea.
Yeah.
There's a reason for that.
Moses, for anyone who's watching this, it's like, what's the Red Sea? That's the Reed Sea, is the Yom Suf, when Moses and the Jewish people were coming out of Egypt. And also there were Arab Arabs. There were people who weren't Hebrew or Jewish, but said, I want to follow this group. They look like they know where they're going. Do you think that studying Torah has helped you physically?
Physically. I know it's helped me mentally.
Yeah. How so?
In working with patient, it's not just a quick fix answer. What I learned in the Torah is give it a chance and think about this. Is this the right way? So let's turn the whole thing around and say, if you're going to say something in favor of the mother, think you may hurt the father.
Right. So let's talk about that for a second. You helped change legislation in the state of Florida. I mean, you did a lot of things in terms of the court here because you were a very famous expert witness as a forensic psychologist. So you worked with a lot of criminals and you helped them.
Also divorce court.
Right. So you worked with a lot of people who had paternity cases. What would you say some of the biggest things you learned from that were in terms of like the abandonment, like a parent talks about another parent in front of the kid? Alienation, parental alienation. What do you feel about that? What did you learn about that?
They're not really showing the love that the other child deserves.
You said against the other child, but you meant parent, but really we're all God's children. It goes back to what you said, treating everyone as a child. If every parent, right, whether it's a mother, father, or two mothers or two fathers, they walk into court and they say, I want full custody. I guess in some cases that should be, right? You could argue there's some people that just don't belong raising children, right? But how often is that really the case? You worked in Bellevue Hospital in New York City.
With the world's largest psychiatric hospital.
Yeah, so you've worked with some pretty difficult psychiatric patients. So how many people do you think really right now are not equipped to spend any zero time with their children?
Well, I would go a little distant. While they may not be capable of being alone with their child, there may be moments where they can tell a story or a little bit of history where that child can learn something.
Yeah.
And I remember my father told me this story.
Yeah.
And it really means this. It's not a yes or no. The binary thinking doesn't work today. Right.
Because every parent that's equipped, quote unquote, to spend time with their children, right, can also have a few moments of vulnerability or you know, craziness or whatever you want to call it. I don't know what the correct term is, but not looking or feeling or seeming so equipped to be with their kid. And I know that because I was raised by two parents that lost it several times and it was really painful.
I bet it was.
But I think what is so special about our relationship is that I decided a while ago that I was not going to allow myself, forget you, I wasn't going to rob myself of getting to experience the good part of you. And it took a lot of patience and a lot of telling myself, like, I'm going to find the reason why my soul picked him to be my dad. Because when I started studying Kabbalah and Torah, and it took a long time for it to really marinate, we all chose our parents, like just like you chose my grandma and grandpa. You were like, oh, I'm coming down from heaven. I'm going to pick those two because I'm going to grow the most. But part of the growth, in my humble opinion, that I've learned now after 45 years of being your kid is that it's not just about the halachas, the Jewish laws, which is, by the way, very short. It's like, don't speak badly about them publicly or privately. Clean up after them when they're older and they can't do it themselves. Take care of them, feed them, clothe them, give them a proper burial. You're not supposed to interrupt them, and you have to, if they take your wallet, you have to let them take it. And if they spit on you, you have to take it. It's so weird. When you have to say Kaddish, you have to say the mourner's prayer after they pass away for a year, every day. So, but that's the nuts and bolts. But to me, it's more than that. What I've learned is we actually have an obligation, as much as we can push ourselves, to spend time. Now, again, I've said this so many times on my podcast, so I have to say it again. I'm not saying throw yourself into the lion's den and be with someone who's physically, emotionally, or sexually abusive. No. But I will say there's a caveat that sometimes someone who in the past was very mean or may have shown textbook emotionally abusive behavior can really change as they
Right.
grow. I think that we all have to do some introspection on what that really means and how much we can allow in that relationship as we grow, because we have an obligation. If half of it is the way the other person is in the
Wow.
relationship, the other half is us. And so if we come into the relationship saying, I'm going to allow all the goodness here, and if someone steps on me or does something wrong, I have the option to walk away or put up my boundaries and say, this is unacceptable. And so through a lot of trial and error over the past several years, we've learned how to have like this great relationship, because I put up my boundaries and I kept talking to myself that I am not going to put myself in an unsafe situation. And I really want to see what's here to learn. And I think on the other side of that rainbow is like a pot of gold, because I feel that honestly, my heart has healed a lot. Sorry, I'm supposed to be asking you the questions, but I
No,
wanted
that's
to
fine,
tell
because I got something to answer.
Oh, go ahead.
The parent is also important in many different ways.
Mhm.
And to recognize their strengths. No, we don't have to run through the weaknesses. The man has passed away, okay? But let's talk about today or prior to him passing away.
Right. Well, at Shiva and also at the funeral, you're only supposed to talk about the good qualities, and you're supposed to exaggerate them, because it's the time when the soul is going back and God wants to hear all the good stuff, supposedly.
By expressing your feelings of how you love the person and why you love the person, that only leads to more growth.
Yeah. And I think in my house growing up, there was a lot of, everyone was yelling and people were constantly bringing out the bad qualities in each other. And I'm going off the model that you and my mom had, because I think you were both so young and so immature when you got married and you hadn't lived on your own yet. And you just would constantly take the bait and yell at each other about all the shortcomings you had. And I actually had to learn that when I was with you, I should share when I appreciated something you did, and you would be so happy. And I didn't even realize that as I was growing up, I just followed in your footsteps because I'm the older kid. And I would also be like, I don't like that. And I would just complain a lot. I was like kind of spoiled. I also was kind of miserable because no one was like asking me, how are you doing? Or making a space for how I was doing. But as I got older and I found that those spaces outside the house, in camp and in theater class and stuff like that, and friends, good friends like Terry and Rami in high school, I was finding my ways to have intimacy, like true kindness and unconditional love. And when I came back to you later on in my life, once I felt more whole, I was able to say, hey, let's not go down that road anymore, Dad. Like, I really, and also there's that famous saying, like, can you imagine if the person was actually there at the funeral to hear all the good things people said about them?
Yeah.
Like, we should be doing that all the time.
Right.
What are we afraid of? Why aren't we sharing how much we care about each other right now? There's something to that. We're living in a time when it's scary to be intimate. Oh no, 1 second. Let me just no, I can't really be here right now. I have to be here. It's like, no, there's a reason why we're here. Maybe that's why people like podcasts so much, because they know it's going to be, no one's on their phone when they're doing a podcast. They're just, for an hour, they're being themselves, What's it like going through chemo?
There's a whole range of feelings. You know that you're in a treatment that is trying to kill poison. And you can't help but think, what could this poison really do to me? You can't help but think, when I was 24, 25 in school and doing all kinds of things, I never thought about this stuff. Now all of a sudden, I'm thinking about that. Then the little problems that come up from the chemo, not like you have a flu and you take a medicine and it's gone in a week. It's not gone. And then you go to another doctor and you wait for an hour, and then they want to tell you how far you progressed or not progressed. It's dealing with frustration,
right?
Because they can tell you, well, we need to do it again. So why don't you come back in 5 days?
Right. It's like going in a circle.
Yeah.
Well, one thing we always talk about now that I've been learning from Dr. Joe Dispenza and Dr. Bruce Lipton, and I've listened to so much about Wayne Dyer because he had cancer, and I know you were a big fan of his. And you both lived in the same places and worked at the same hospitals and went to the same schools.
And he went to St. John's, where I went, yeah.
And taught there when you were there. And then you both moved to Florida. You know, it's hard for me to believe that people are still, I'm not saying chemo's wrong, but medicine breaks things down, it kills things, or it blocks pain. Whereas food, like healthy food and learning like spiritual texts, whether it's Torah or something that makes your soul feel alive, that's all energy. And I've fought you, but you've done meditation several times and you've been part of these coherence healings. And there's been times where you were in the hospital and they were like, oh, he's not good. And we did the coherence healings and you went on Zoom with 40 other people who were sending you light. And it sounded crazy, but you got out.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that? Do you think that there's anything to this idea that what we're doing every week, learning Torah and changing the energy and then doing meditation together and praying and breathing and then having you do the coherence, do you think there's any respite in the disease when you do that?
It's the unknown. And then you suffer a side effect. What it teaches you though is not to lose your patience.
Yeah.
Now, as a younger man, if you knew me, I lost my patience a lot.
Yeah, you're so different now. Oh my God. So could it be a gift if you learned how to be more patient?
You better develop some patience, or else you're going to be very miserable. And when I used to evaluate patients, I went to a patient's house once to evaluate his head trauma. Went into the kitchen of the patient and the wife, and I asked the patient if he had any medical report that we could look at. The aide looked at me and he says, I'm not sure where they are. And the man went absolutely bonkers. We have you sitting here in my kitchen and you can't do it. An easy job. Just find the papers that the doctor's waiting for.
So he was impatient and it made his head trauma worse. Okay.
Often I would meet with an aide or a spouse and they would tell me all the medications, which would help in my diagnosis. But I keep thinking about this man, screaming, and the wife sat next to me that I can't keep him here.
So you have to, I'm going to put him in a home.
Yeah.
So let's go back for a second because you started talking about lack of patience, but now you actually have a lack of patience, like your clients.
Oh yeah.
So what was that like to leave the office after? I know you got your doctorate when you were 40 because I remember being with you when you walked across the stage at Nova, and you had been going to night school and doing your residency for such a long time because you were always trying to support the family and also work. And so I think you were 40 when you got it. So you've had the practice for like 36 years. Yeah. So what was it like to have to close the door at 75, 36 years? And it was such a big part of your life.
You constantly fight with yourself because you try to think, well, maybe if I did something this way and that way, I'd be able to stay in practice. My secretary would say, but they need you, they want you, but we don't have any room to fit them in. And I said, I spent so much time developing the practice where people would just be referred over.
Which is what you got.
Which is what I got.
You were really good at it.
And now I'm saying, can't do it anymore. And I feel very funny because that was my identity.
So now that it's been like 6 months,
yeah.
What does it feel? What's your new identity?
Being a father is one of them. It is. Being closer to you is another piece of identity. Reading things that I want to read, that are forced to read. But you realize what kind of identity you have.
So attached to that name and your phone
Yeah,
number.
people would like to hear people say, hey, Dr. Heller, how you been? You going to that seminar in New York?
And when I go around town here, everybody's like, of course I know who your dad is. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
He worked on that big criminal case and
Mhm.
helped that person, instead of getting life in prison, they got 20 years
Yeah.
or, you really are on the side of a lot of criminals.
Well, you wanted to give the jury and the people an understanding because it's so quick to make a snap judgment.
Yeah.
Even when there's murder involved.
Right. It's a human being in there
Right.
with a set of big problems.
That's right.
So how do you think we could stop school shootings then? I'm only asking you the easy ones.
That's an easy one. When the massacre occurred in Texas,
Yeah, recently, 19
and I had
children
so many little 10-year-old children
and teachers.
and 2 teachers
Terrible.
dead. They're not going to get a chance with life. Basically, it's not just taking guns off the street.
Which we're very much for, but.
Because the real law is the person loses control,
Right,
even for that 15 minutes.
right,
And then because the gun is nearby,
right.
or the window is nearby, they act out.
Right. Like Nathaniel Brazil, who was was he your first school shooting patient in 2001? Well, he was the first one that I knew about, because when you called me and you said, are you sitting down? I'm representing a 13-year-old kid in court, and he shot your teacher.
Yeah, because Mr. Gruno was your teacher.
Yeah, and
here I was
sister.
Evaluating Nathaniel.
Crazy. And having to fight for Nathaniel's rights as an American child who picked up a gun and killed a teacher. He was 13. He was being tried as an adult. First kid in the United States or first kid in Florida?
No. You had other one before that.
But I think you said he was the first kid being tried as not juvie, like as an adult. And you were the guy you were his voice.
My buddy thought he shot the teacher at the end, put him away.
Right.
Well, maybe we need to look at this.
Yeah. And also, great example of, he didn't just have mental illness, he had a psychotic break.
Yeah.
So maybe talk about that for a second, because that's huge.
Well, I was talking about it a couple of days ago when they put some of the suggestions for the restructuring of the law in regard to guns. Nathaniel was not a wild, but he was involved with activities in school.
Yeah.
He was a good kid.
But wasn't he part of like an academic program that Bill Clinton had put together, and he carried it with him?
I think so. Yeah, but I don't remember
The name of it. Okay, sorry.
No, there's a lot of stuff on him, but meanwhile, it's not like, well, he's mentally ill, so take the guns away from him.
Would you have seen the signs that he was not well mentally before this day? No, he seemed like he was an A student.
Well, he was a good student. He had his problem. Yeah.
But he was 13. And what happened the day that he had his break?
Well, what happened is you watch the tension build in this kid. He's a good kid that wanted to make a good impression. Because he's a good kid, and teachers will understand this, the teacher who told them to put the water balloon away, they were playing water balloon on the front lawn of the school.
The last day of school, right?
Pretty much, throwing the water balloon, but having fun, and that's maybe what kids do.
Oh, it's definitely what you do in Florida, because it's so hot outside that it's like the only sweet thing kids can do on the last day of school that kind of makes sense. And the teachers go, all right, let them have it, because it's like 100 degrees out.
So Nathaniel is playing water balloons in front of the school, and the teacher comes over to him and says, Nathaniel, get back in the school and stop this, and you're going to be suspended.
For the rest of the year.
For the rest of the year.
Even though it was the last day of school, which was like a really stupid thing to
So
say.
how are we going to suspend him? Why suspend him?
And why just him and no one else?
Right.
Yeah, he was singled out.
Because you can. He's the kind of kid you can go over and say, get in the room. And he's not the kind of kid that says, the last day of school. So,
Actually gonna feel it. He's gonna feel that empathy, like, oh, what did I do? I did the wrong thing.
right.
Yeah. And the teacher was picking on him because the teacher was probably feeling really disrespected. I
Yeah.
know, I've been that teacher.
So here he is, he goes back into the school. He was been taught shooting from his uncle. He
Oh,
had a gun
at home.
at home, but he didn't have anybody at home
To say, don't do this.
to say, what happened? Oh, we'll take care of it on Monday. Don't worry about it.
Right.
And he's upset because now he has a bad name. He's doing something wrong.
And when you're in 8th grade,
Yeah.
that's the end of your life. He didn't have a father figure. That was the first thing. Anyway, he goes back to school.
Goes back to school and he's angry. In that moment when he's angry because he feels embarrassed that he's been picked out, that he scored the water balloon fight, which he didn't.
And what is everyone saying about me? It's all about him,
Well,
right?
but-
Which is so normal in 8th grade.
So he takes the gun with him to school. And as he goes to Mr. Gruno's class and holds the gun up,
And by the way, Mr. Bruno was a saint. He worked at my school here in Boca Raton and moved to the inner city school that Nathaniel went to because he felt it would be more of a challenge for him. And he was such a great guy. He reminded me of like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. He looked like Shaggy and he was so fun. And on Halloween, he would always dress up in a fun costume and everybody loved him. He was just so loved.
so here you have a youngster, an adolescent actually, who's trying to reconcile in his own mind, what did I do? How did I do? Takes the gun out and he points it to Mr. Bruno,
Who says, tries to calm him down.
who tries to calm him down and says, Nathaniel, put that toy away.
He thought it was a toy.
He thought it was a toy. And here the tension is building. And Mr. Bruno gets shot.
One time, right?
Yeah.
And killed,
Mhm.
leaving behind a wife and a baby.
Right. But are you going to say, well, he was mentally ill? Well, where's the mentally ill? Is it because he's in 8th grade? He's an adolescent?
And he's having moments of catastrophe. Yeah.
Is there a reason? Because he had a gun? So, yeah, the gun was available, but it's not just mental illness.
Right. It was a psychotic break.
Right. And you're going to find a lot of youngsters who are going to act out.
Right.
Because they're teenagers and
Well, they're also watching video games, television,
right,
shorts on their phone, commercials, even YouTubes,
yeah,
where they're glamorizing having a gun.
right. But also it shows power.
Right.
And
And they're listening to music that says it as well. And
yeah,
I mean, not funny to joke about gun violence. And we think it's like, okay, that's just, we're so desensitized. But it's more than that, Dad. I really think that as a kid, I think I would have been less catastrophizing had I been learning, spiritual texts and laws, just the 7 Noahide laws, like the 7 laws of Noah, Noah's Ark.
Yeah.
He followed these 7 laws. And basically it's like, don't be cruel to others. You don't kill, you don't steal, you don't adulterate, don't be cruel to animals. These are like basic principles that no one's learning in school. And yet we have such an emphasis on treat everyone kindly. Well, how do you do that if you're not taught how to treat yourself kindly? If you do unto others, right? The golden rule, which Hillel said, do unto others. You want to learn the whole Torah, love others the way that you would want to love yourself. But what if you don't know how to love yourself? What if there's no one at home that's making a space for you? And I grew up in a home where I felt like I didn't always have a space for me. That wasn't your intention, nor was it my mother's. I know that the two of you love me more than anything, but sometimes very well-meaning people, even Nathaniel's mom and aunt and uncle, you can go wrong because you just don't have the time to sit down, or you don't make the time and learn laws of something bigger than all of us that wants us to get along. And I think if we could just embrace that for a second, every day, sit with somebody, no phones, learn with them, be intimate with them in terms of telling them how much you appreciate them, and making a space to really share how you feel. What's on your heart? Are you having a bad day? No, don't just say it. I was fine. really share it, because it's in the conversation and dealing with issues, the day-to-day difficulties of being a teenager in today's day and age. If we don't take the time to sit and parent and really be there, you can really go off the rails.
That's right.
And that's called mental unwellness. And it doesn't have to be that you're bipolar, depressive syndrome, anxiety. People have lots of moments when they feel depressive feelings or anxiety. And it doesn't mean that they have a disorder. It just means in that moment they felt. So that was really helpful. Thank you. What's your future?
I can try to create and try to have some people I'm close to be part of it.
What are some of your goals?
To continue studying with you, maybe to travel with the family.
We got to go to Israel.
Yeah, it's certain issues that come up, like right now, there's a big issue in the massacre in Texas. Something you learn from it. You need to understand that the Bible has taught us. It's important to connect us with the family, what they want to do, encourage them to develop their craft. If they're in theater, let's go more. If they're writing plays, not necessarily the biggest on Broadway, but there's some room there. But we have to do that.
You've always been so supportive of me and the
I
arts.
am, and I think that's really important.
No matter how old I am, he's always like, try, do more, which is amazing, because sometimes I can't always pay my bills. Last thing, what's one thing everyone, after all these years of seeing patients every day and all these years of studying people in America with major issues and being through the court systems time and time again, fighting for people's rights as a human, civil rights, what's one thing you would recommend to everybody to live a life of pure freedom?
Respect other people for their rights, for their practice of democracy, and that encourage them to develop themselves as far as they can go without frustrating themselves and their family, but enjoy it because there are opportunities. So that one thing is develop. You were born to develop yourself. Let's continue.
Thanks, Dad. I love you. Happy Father's Day.
Thank you.